Welcome to Head of the Class, a podcast produced by Our Schools USA. I'm Christina Gagne, the former school board member.
And I'm Kristi Hurst, the former educator and current parent of 3 kids in public schools.
So we've been noticing a trend across mainstream media, and it is a far departure from the big glow up that CBS did last March of the group Moms for Liberty. And from Wired magazine, which, for all intents and purposes, I was shocked was covering Moms for Liberty, given sort of what their wheelhouse is with technology, to political publications, we keep seeing headlines that all are angling at like one theme, which is the vein of Moms for Liberty is dead, shrinking, or being reduced to shambles. And we're here today on this podcast to tell you that is absolutely not the case. Even if they did literally, as an organization, poof, disappear tomorrow, there are plenty of groups that are doing similar work, and their funders will just create a new incarnation of the group to take their place. Exactly. And we're going to highlight one of those organizations today that is extremely well funded, Parents Defending Education. But today's podcast is going to be 2 parts. First, we're going to address what I think is the cultural myth in today's media that Moms for Liberty is fading fast. And then second, we're going to talk about other groups that are like Moms for Liberty, both in name with groups like Parents Defending Education, but also what types of groups you should be looking for at the state or local level that are not going to bear the Moms for name or bear the Parents Defending Education name, but they are going to be using terminology or focusing on issues that literally make them exactly the same as groups like Moms for Liberty. So I did a little talking head video last week. We threw it up on our Instagram. And the article from the Daily Beast, which was even Moms for Liberty are tired of Moms for Liberty. And we are so tired of Moms for Liberty. So the headline to me was funny. And so I jumped in and read the article. And just to kind of do a little bit of a setup, and then Kristi and I will talk about this a little bit. It was basically focusing on a chapter in Pennsylvania. And just so you
also have a chapter.
Yes, we have a variety of chapters actually in Pennsylvania that are not dead or dying. Actually, Pennsylvania last cycle was very fruitful for our organization in helping get some great pro-public education people elected.
Yes.
But this article was an analysis of this one chapter in Pennsylvania who started around COVID issues. And just so you have the genesis of the background of Moms for Liberty was started by 3 school board members, some former school board members and current school board members out of Florida. And they really started in early 2021 around COVID issues. So they came in a moment at time, and their founding was not this organic founding, though, but they latched onto, and they have very big funders who have ulterior motives, and we'll talk about that on this podcast. But as a group, they came out, and their messaging was really around COVID restrictions. And that's where they really grew. They also had the advantage of, at the time, because if you've been following the Ziegler drama in Florida, you'll realize her husband is no longer the chairman of the Florida Republican Party.
Right.
Bridget Ziegler's husband, who's one of the founders, co-founders of Moms for Liberty. At the time, one of the co-founders' husbands was the chair of the Florida Republican Party. Officials like Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, former presidential candidate. They just had so much conservative traction, both with elected officials, with, Republican and conservative institutions, and ultimately the conservative and far-right media. And so their growth was very dramatic. And they came in at a time where they were finding parents who were tired of COVID restrictions. And we are not going to get into COVID restrictions. I believe that everybody wants to move on from that phase of our lives the past few years. But that issue, those issues related to COVID restrictions, is really what propelled the group on a local level. And so the article in the Daily Beast is really kind of an anatomy of how this Pennsylvania group started, and then how, as Moms for Liberty has shifted their focus on issues over time that are no longer closed schools, but book bans, how they have lost interest, and that this is a prototype for what is happening across the country. And so I'll pause for a moment, Kristi, and kind of get, your feedback on this, because you are working with our chapters across the country and sort of just practically, is this something we're seeing across the country, or is this sort of like a one-off?
They're definitely not having the same traction joining. I have not seen another Moms for Liberty group drop off like that. However, I have seen their members not want to be public anymore. There's a Los Angeles Moms for Liberty that recently popped up, and we have 2 chapters out there in that same area. And the same thing happened. They were, on the website listed as the organizers and the leaders, and suddenly they started disappearing off the website. But they're still doing the work behind the scenes at that chapter. This chapter in Pennsylvania where they had people just leave, that was, first I was alerted by our chapter leader there telling me, oh my gosh, look what happened. And I don't think that they're dropping out of Moms for Liberty. What is happening though is the community, because they have gotten press, really showing what they're about and who they're for, people don't listen to them the same way. So they're not able to trick the average voter like they were before with saying things like parent rights or back to basics. A lot of people now know what that's code for, and know that that means there are Moms for Liberty who are also for banning books, who are also for, changing curriculum and not teaching accurate history. So they know what these people are about, and they don't like that. And so the name itself is starting to turn people away. People don't want to have a Moms for Liberty school board member anymore, more and more so. But the beliefs behind Moms for Liberty, their goals, those aren't going anywhere. There are just different groups popping up, pushing the exact same agenda. Moms for Liberty, they're still everywhere. They're still going on media. They still have millions of dollars to spend, and they're spending it. And because you and I know how they're backed by these, mega organizations that are national, that have a lot of money, that have their big think tanks, I am positive they are going to shift their messaging for this upcoming election in November away from the things they're doing. I see a lean towards protecting all kids. That's something that I'm seeing coming up. And I am not hearing as much of back to basics or parent rights. I'm hearing protect all kids. And I think what we're going to see is Moms for Liberty, they just have too much money. They have too many members. They're going to shift their strategy so that they don't turn away voters as rapidly as they are right now. And you are seeing their members not take such a public role. So there's that happening, but they're not going anywhere. Their goals are not going anywhere. They're not giving up. And there are plenty of other people below them who have the same goals without their name. Those people are still out there operating. They're still working with Moms for Liberty. They're still going to Leadership Institute trainings all the time. They are all over the place. Leadership Institute is Moms for Liberty. That is them. And it's going nowhere. It's just that they aren't maybe putting the name Moms for Liberty. I even saw today online, they have a new shirt that doesn't say Moms for Liberty anymore. It says like We the People. So
I've seen that.
did you see? So I'm like, oh,
Also, they don't mean we the people like all people.
no.
They mean we the people as in far right Christian nationalists who agree with their agenda.
Exactly. But I was interesting because they're not writing Moms for Liberty on there anymore. It's like they're advertising this other stuff. So it's they know that name has began to be exposed more, and they can't trick people as easily as what they were doing before. They're going nowhere.
Yeah. And I want to make a fine point on this. So, first and foremost, if you are just sort of, we are assuming always that we are having people listen who maybe are jumping into this because they've seen a recent issue. I mean, unfortunately, there's been a lot of terrible things that have happened around these culture war issues in our public schools and to youth over the last couple of weeks. And so we know there's some newer people to the space who are now activated and motivated. Moms for Liberty receives a majority of their funding from the Heritage Foundation and multimillionaire donors. Tax reports as recent as last year, and other reports have shown they have around $2 million at least, which is nothing to, put your nose up at if you're a nonprofit organization. And as recently as a month ago, I was seeing that they were putting out posts for hiring new people. Mm-hmm. If you are having trouble, you're not out hiring people necessarily, especially in the nonprofit space. Like you're not out hiring new people. And more likely than not, they're hiring these new people because they're realizing that we need a different growth strategy, because their growth strategy again before was parents frustrated after the long pandemic with COVID restrictions in various states. And that was an organizing strategy because one, people were at home in large part, or they were mad about the state of schools, even if their state and local government had less restrictive COVID, guidelines. But still, there was just sort of this feeling that, parents weren't necessarily being heard about public schools. And so you had parents who found the organization, and the name is creative as it is also deceptive. And so you did have people start to latch on to Moms for Liberty. And they also, in the public education space, were looked on the surface as one of the more palatable groups around COVID restrictions. Because if you were in that ecosystem at the time, there were some crazy groups across the country that were emerging who were very radical and aggressive. And in comparison, on the surface, very clear, on the surface, in comparison, I think people that did not like the restrictions, that's one of the first places that they were seeing on conservative media, because they weren't in mainstream media at that point. They were mostly on conservative media, on
Exactly.
Fox, Newsmax, OAN, these conservative outlets.
Right.
But they're not going anywhere. We've also seen reports. I mean, there's been the Bridget Ziegler scandal in Florida, which has, caused clearly major issues, and I think was really put this new mainstream media like thread in place on Moms for Liberty, why we've been seeing so much of this the last month and a half. But you have to remember, there's been chapters that have done like hat tips to Hitler. I mean, there's been a whole litany of these individual chapters and the organization as a whole. I mean, they had this bizarro summit in Philadelphia last summer where they had the greatest hits list of far right Christian nationalists,
And
including Ryan Walters, the state superintendent of public instruction for Oklahoma, who under his watch has allowed great tragedy happen in Oklahoma public schools and these really discriminatory policies. I mean, so
it's
they're
important
not,
to note,
yeah,
like, those discriminatory policies are heavily pushed by Moms for Liberty,
yeah.
and it comes from Heritage. And they are out there using the Leadership Institute to train people on pushing those policies in their communities. So they're very tied to things that are still happening on the ground.
And
They
it's,
already have advertised their summit this summer. They're already advertising it.
yeah, I mean, they're not, if you're not hosting a national conference, if you're going somewhere, you're not recruiting candidates to run for office at all levels of government to impact public education policy if your organization's going anywhere. So let's actually look at the proof points. And as much as we are tired of Moms for Liberty, their rhetoric, their chaos, their policies, I mean, they've just basically spin a wheel and find a new culture war policy, but they've headed into what I think is some of their most dangerous territory with this anti-LGBTQIA policy train they've been pushing state by state, but also with the book banning, which I think is, this denying access to information. I mean, a lot of the policies in place in Florida right now, which that state is just a dumpster fire of education policy, is because Moms for Liberty and groups like them and people like them were working hand in hand with DeSantis. So
And
we've
their
seen
book
chaos
banning
in education.
policy is still an anti-LGBTQ policy,
Yes.
because their goal is to remove books that have LGBTQIA themes and characters. So it is very, it's still contributing to the harm we're seeing happening across the country.
Yeah. And in response to the post that we put up about a week ago, we've had people across the country reach out to us, and, they have told us, what, yeah, our local Moms for Liberty is now something for Georgians. And, they just rebranded. And we've heard a lot of that bubble up, that the same people just basically threw Moms for Liberty off their materials, threw them off their website, but they're still getting information from them. They still technically are part of Moms for Liberty. From what we know about the organization, they do require a lot of information to get access to their materials and resources. So I don't think these local level affiliates, if you will, these we have chapters, I believe they have chapters as well. These chapters of Moms for Liberty are truly no longer Moms for Liberty ideals. I think that maybe they're just rebranding because they realize they got their butt kicked last election cycle because of the brand of Moms for Liberty. And that was a strategy last election cycle that was successful, is that you did see common sense parents. And I again come back to, for me, It's common sense people who love public education and public schools and crazy far right Christian nationalists. That's where we're at in public education. So we're a big tent group at Our Schools USA. If you love public schools and want them to serve all students and families, like we work with a very diverse group of parents and community members. What we were hearing was that's really what it was, is the community coming together regardless of an R or a D next to your name or an I, and saying like these Moms for Liberty candidates are terrible for our schools, they're terrible for our community. And so that moniker really became laden with a meaning of all Moms for Liberty wants to do is destroy and take things away from public schools. They don't add any value.
Right.
And when that is what's happening at the local level in elections, and you have local leaders who are seen as conservative, liberal, everywhere on the spectrum coming out together and saying, united, we don't want this in our community and our schools, then yeah, the brand does get tarnished locally. But that doesn't mean that these people have disappeared. And it doesn't mean that they're not just rebranding with some new name, or maybe they're just, not taking the National Moms for Liberty pledge, but they're still going to the Leadership Institute. They're still receiving the training. They're still getting the resources. They're still ramping up for 2024. And if they weren't, we wouldn't see organizations that, pull the strings. Like I think Heritage operates on two models, which normally I would say are contradictory, but I think actually they're complementary. I think they're puppet masters and they're pulling strings, but I also think there's a hub and spoke model between all these conservative far right extreme organizations across the country. And so you do see like the Moms for Liberty, the big national group with the brand that clearly Heritage thought was appealing and sexy to parents. But you also see groups at the state level that emerge that are affiliated with, Heritage Foundation and other national groups. You see groups at the national level. So you can really look at the infrastructure that has been put in place nationally with the CNP, the Council for National Policy. You then have Heritage. Then you have groups like Turning Point USA. You can go state by state and you're going to find a very similar model. You're going to find kind of a shot caller or shot callers of organizations that then have these smaller orgs that are often issue specific. So a great example of this is, and we have a post about this coming up, we are going to shine light on all the homies who are behind Project 2025. There is a laundry list of these sort of like access of far right evil that are behind this thing. But if you go,
chapter has a different set of people worked on. Yes.
But if you kind of go through the list and pick out names, one of the things that, and Kristi did a video on this a couple weeks ago, this whole attack on trying to say that transgender women are going to ruin Title IX. That has been a thing for the last 2.5 years. There's a group that that's all they do, literally. And they're branded like they're women's equality in sports or something. I'm making that up, but it's of that.
It's very much branded that way.
Yeah.
It's that we have fought for women's rights all these years, and now you're taking them away, and we're keeping women. It's very much branded.
But that's a great example of the national hub and spoke model. One of the spokes is like, we focus just on this issue. Another group focuses just on school privatization or just a piece of that. So you see these different groups focusing on these different issues. At the state level, if you go state by state, you're going to find a state organization that looks just like that. You're going to find a local organization or affiliates of national organizations like Turning Point USA. So let's not live in this myth that somehow we have been, wholly defeating Moms for Liberty. I will say last election cycle, which was an off year for most local jurisdictions, if we're going to talk just local school boards, yeah, I mean, they lost a ton of their races. We had a front row seat in 5 different states to this happening. But that doesn't mean that they're not recalibrating, rebranding, and re-strategizing about what they're going to communicate about in 2024.
And they absolutely are.
Yeah.
They're absolutely. They have too many members to let go of that sort of messaging hub they have. Heritage is a well-funded, well-managed. There are smart people running Heritage Foundation and the CNP. They've been around a very long time, and they have been very successful for decades on getting their plans implemented when certain presidential elections go their way. So they're not going to just let go of all those people they have access to, because they are, very spread out across the country. The Leadership Institute, and I bet if you would look, people on the ground that I talk to are not seeing a lot of Moms for Liberty things locally. They do, though, see Leadership Institute trainings. Just in the region of Southern California that we are near, I've seen 3 or 4 in the last 6 months. And that's covering a region that everyone in this region could probably drive to and access. So it's not leaving or going anywhere. They're shifting their messaging. They are moving away from that sort of, back to basics stuff that we used to see. And they're shifting more towards what I am seeing, at least, is, and there's a lot of things happening under this umbrella, but protect all kids. That's what they're shifting to. And they push for a lot of policies to protect all kids. And almost everything you see happening in like the Ed chapter of Project 2025 falls under that umbrella.
And that's why I think you have to be very attentive. And we really appreciate, we've had some questions sent to us where people were like, I'm kind of embarrassed to ask this. First of all, don't be embarrassed to ask a question. Like, this is confusing. They are like so good at gaslighting. I mean, if you hear protect all kids, just like if you hear parents' rights, on the surface, that sounds amazing. Like protect all kids. If you mean all kids, if you mean you want all kids to be in a safe and supportive environment in our nation's public schools, sure. But if you look at the policies, and I think that's what's important. And I think what I want to end on before we get to Parents Defending Education, because I do want to highlight another better funded group than Moms for Liberty, who you might not be as familiar with, is that you really have to listen to what these people are saying. Yeah. And so if they come into school board meetings and people are talking about pornography in schools, boom, might as well be Moms for Liberty. Mm-hmm. The minute the word woke comes out of someone's mouth, done. If they want policies that take away things like letting people use their preferred pronouns, which I'm sorry, as much drama as they've caused about that, you would think that's all what's happening in public schools. That was like a de minimis thing happening day to day until they blew it up and made it a national issue. And in fact, I can't tell you how much of Project 2025, the education chapter and their messaging, is all that's about. And there's no meaningful reforms to public education. There's no ideas for new programs, how to fix special ed, how to tackle any of this. It's all about this issue, which is not a major part of public education, but they are the ones that have made it a major part of it. But that's what's deceptive, is that the way they frame it is you would think the way they're framing things, unless you start to really listen and you know the coded language and know what they actually mean, it can be hard for parents to ascertain like who are the good guys who want to support all families and who are the ones that want to be exclusionary. That's very hard to tell.
Yeah, it is. I agree 100%. And I forgot the thing I was going to say. I'm like, it'll come back to me. I did have a point there.
It'll come back to you. Well, that's a great segue to Parents Defending Education.
Yes.
So, one of the questions we were asked post video is, well, who are the other big bads? And frankly, I can look on their website, and that's one of my favorite things to do on this podcast is to be on the internet talking to you. So let's bring up their website and who they are. Now, we have done a series before, and it's probably 4 or 5 of these we put up in the last year called Dropping Some Knowledge. If you go back through our feed, you'll see this big hand literally like dropping some knowledge in the post. One of the groups that we did cover in our first or second post was Parents Defending Education, because they are another one of these groups that has been out there. And let's start with their name. Parents Defending Education.
And I was about to read their first line. Okay. A grassroots organization working to reclaim our schools from activists promoting harmful agendas. I love when they use that word activists, like they're activists. What's an activist? Like anyone who is actively promoting something in this realm of like public education is an activist. So are you. Like what?
They are trying to pretend that they are parents. They are the parents, and that no one else is the parents, and anybody else coming in is not a parent, which is totally just a disconnect from reality, because the majority of parents we talk to, want safety in public schools and want to focus just on learning and supportive environments. So, but they have to create this narrative that crazy left-leaning activists are coming in and trying to take over public schools. But also, I'm on their website,
I'm looking
and
at their website here because clearly I've only read articles about them. So we're witnessing my reaction in real time
okay,
to
okay.
the website. I'm sorry. Go.
I'm on this pretty frequently for legal reasons. But I just want to give you some things that if you're going on a website and you see these things, they're probably tells. So first of all, in the menu bar at the top of the page, there's a link to an indoctrination map.
That's what I'm looking at right now.
If there is an indoctrination map on a website, I'm going to tell you right now, it is a far right Christian nationalist extremist group. It is not a we love all kids and we want good public schools. So let's just start there as a tell. But let me just read some other things on this website highlighted. They just sued a school district in Iowa over misgendering students, and the school district ended up having to pay like $20,000. I believe they settled the case. So they go after and they sue school districts over gender identity and related issues. So they are going after local public schools over issues that are not impacting day-to-day education. They have a list of school districts on their website that have transgender student policies.
I'm like, you
Interesting
look it
for
up
you.
state by state, and I'm like, wow. I mean, I've only read articles about them, full
Yeah.
disclosure. And
But
wow.
also in like literally I'm scrolling down their site, one of their featured stories or featurettes is Little Red Classrooms, China's infiltration of American K
That's
through.
what I was looking at. I'm like, what am I looking at? What is this?
So,
Oh, wow.
there's some tells here for me, and we clearly know I clearly know far more about the group. I track a lot of the legal developments across the country for our schools just to see sort of what chicanery is happening with
And I have heard from like our chapters on the
yeah.
ground, like this group is doing a lot of stuff. You need to talk about this group. So what I'm hearing is more on the ground from people and seeing
Yeah.
articles. But no, I've
But they're similar to Moms for Liberty. They have talking points on their website. They have this indoctrination map. They try to form local parent groups at the state level, and they send those parents in the school board meetings armed with what is misinformation, just like Moms for Liberty. And they go in, and that's where they get their talking points. So they have a very similar model. It's just we have not seen the same necessarily. We'd love to get some feedback if they're also chaos causers, as we call them. Moms for Liberty was literally training people to go in and like throw the desk up at a school board meeting and cause drama. Like that's what they were training people to do before 2022. Parents Defending Education, we don't know if that chaos model is their model, but they definitely are arming people with similar talking points and using scare tactic strategies to get parents to think things are happening locally and to miscategorize and misinform on issues that then, cause very similar culture war problems as we've seen Moms for Liberty cause across the
what
country.
is this? What
But
is
we haven't really covered this yet, but the far right is
Sorry.
really into China's infiltration of K through 12 schools. You will see this. Ron DeSantis has talked about this. You've seen this. Other conservative, pundits, media darlings will bring this up from time to time. We just haven't seen this as much at the local school board level or so I think we don't talk about this as much, but it's definitely one of the like threads that you will see, the through lines you see across the country. And Kristi's just shocked.
I am. I'm sorry. I guess
Have stopped her full stop.
what,
But
what
I
is
just want to
happening?
I just want to state that literally, like, their trending content is they're focusing on things they call incidents in public schools, most of which involve LGBTQIA issues. They are focusing on lawsuits. The other trend that we're seeing is that groups like this are focusing on anti-Semitism, but please do not be, how to put this the right way, do not be taken by these groups as if they are actually trying to fight for students' rights and clamp down on this. Like they are using this as, I think, a screen for a lot of the other bad things that they are doing.
When
But
when you
that,
have like actual Nazis showing up to support you, you can't claim you're anti-Semitic. I mean, you can't claim that you're not that. That's what I'm going to leave it at.
yeah. So, they are doing this very similar things to Moms for Liberty, but I also want to point out that I'm on their website under Parent Engagement Field Guide, and I'm scrolling down to investigation research is key, and then I'm going down further to informing the wider community. Um, they're encouraging opposition research of schools. Opposition research is a term of art in like politics, of like you digging up dirt on your opponent. So again, framing, we keep bringing this up. Schools are the enemy, teachers are the enemy. They are coming out with the same message as groups like Bonds for Liberty. They think divisive ideologies include things like social emotional learning, social justice, are divisive ideologies. That's their 101 on those things.
Like the opposite.
But then, they're doing a lot of the things though that we are, from a tactics perspective, why we tell people to do these things. So writing letters to the editor, showing up and speaking at school board meetings, like the reason that Moms for Liberty was able to latch on in the pandemic and post pandemic prior to the last off election cycle was people were scared and they were running into board meetings and causing chaos, and people were disengaged. We've crossed the Rubicon on that, y'all. So, they are saying things on their website, just like Mom for Liberty was telling people. We've seen very similar materials put out by Moms for Liberty and the Leadership Institute. This is why we tell you to do very similar things from a tactics perspective. Don't be crazy and don't cause chaos.
Yeah.
But this is why we tell people to go speak at a school board meeting, then submit a letter to the editor, make a video, post it on the internet. Like, these are all educative things that we need to be doing to counter the misinformation. But we just wanted to highlight Parents Defending Education because, they actually have probably they have a better organized website.
But
They
much
have,
and
they
they have
have, they
far
have
more resources on
yeah,
here.
far more resources on there. They clearly, just from a funding perspective, have more resources. And
Yeah.
again, they have a name that is misleading. I mean, again, you hear Parents Defending Education on its, surface. That seems great. Wouldn't we all want that? But you have to like peel back the layers with these organizations. And so, really the point of this podcast was that we're tired of reading the articles about Moms for Liberty being dead. I think that the media, it seems like a cool thing to talk about because the Ziegler scandal is just so wild. And that is a wild scandal. I'm not going to lie. Like,
And she still is on the school board.
yeah, I mean, that's what's so crazy to me. But that is a scandal that then everybody was like, okay, in the media, that this is about clicks and attention.
Yes.
I got to cover it. So
Yeah.
if you weren't covering Moms for Liberty and the tie to Ziegler, like you were missing out on something. But
Right.
there was a purpose behind that. That was like a moment around that scandal where, journalists and media outlets were like, we've got to find our piece of this. But I don't think that they were doing in-depth research into the financial resources of the group, where they still are on the ground, what's happening with their chapters. And I think that what we want to say, just from, we have partners across the country, chapters across the country, individual parents, and we are collectively hearing the same thing, that they're either still there and they're rebranding, or they are sort of in a dormancy pre-election, but they're not going anywhere. So they may rebrand. Like, we've seen new groups like Awaken America also emerge. But
Coming up too more is Moms for America.
yes, Moms for America, which we will
They've
also
been around a long time,
yes,
but they are kind of making a little bit of a comeback. And I think part of it is they're trying to pick up where Moms for Liberty sort of is like taking a little step back. They're kind of stepping forward, but they're all connected.
yeah. So I think the point of this podcast was, we're tired of seeing those headlines. They're misleading. I understand from a clicks perspective why they're writing it, but I think for the average person, I don't think you should be breathing a sigh of relief like all
As
is okay.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, we have so many podcasts that we are going to be doing the next couple weeks. Like the house is on fire, you guys. It really, really is. And,
yeah.
unfortunately, and, we'll do a podcast on this. So I don't want to get too into it. Like we try to be thoughtful about how we approach issues. But, this is dangerous.
Yeah.
And, we are making a little bit of light of it so that it's a little more palatable because this is all very heavy topics that we tend to cover.
Mhm.
But these groups have misleading names, they have misleading information, and they present the issues in a way that if you don't have an in-depth understanding, or you are just consuming whatever media source and not really having the time even necessarily to say, well, is that actually right? Like, this is the danger of this. And I also, do hold the media to account. I think it's dangerous to have, a title. I mean, even Moms for Liberty or Tired of Moms for Liberty. I get this title and the story actually, like literally what happened in Pennsylvania was this chapter around Allentown. Literally no one would even want to be the president anymore. Like it went from like
Yeah,
a bunch of people
it's
to
like
no.
people.
Yeah. So that was, I think, more accurate of like nobody wanted to lead the group anymore, therefore it was done.
You're
But
right.
that's just one group in a very large country where they were boasting at one point. I believe they still do. They have around 250 chapters. So they have tentacles across the country, but we have to take this very seriously. And so, I do think
You're seeing me sitting here, laughing at what I'm seeing on there, but that's because sometimes I need to laugh. And also, it's very heavy behind the scenes too. And I think
yeah.
that, there's definitely a frustration from both of us that, yeah, that's a clickbait title, but we don't want people to think you're safe now and we don't have to worry about this anymore. That's not true. In fact, it's getting more dangerous. So, yeah, Moms for Liberty is lessening, but the impact of the policies that they advocate for and the impact of the movement that they are a part of is not lessening. It's growing. There are states, there are districts implementing these things actively, and they're not new anymore. Now we're seeing the long-term negative effects that these policies and ideas are having on our students and our kids, and the real risk their safety is at, and their lives, honestly. I mean, truly their lives. So now it's not just that, oh, we got elected and we put a policy in place. We're seeing the negativity as it builds up and impacts, the climate in these districts and these our public schools. That takes a little while to see the effects of it. And now we're seeing these very scary, terrible effects of these policies. And it is not going to lessen. It is going to get worse because you have entire states implementing it, and you have an entire presidential campaign being built on this. And they want to take all of this nationwide.
And on that note, we want to thank everybody for joining us today on this podcast. Again, this has been Head of the Class, a podcast produced by Our Schools USA. I'm Christina Gagne, the former school board member.
And I'm Kristi Hurst, the current parent and former educator.
And always remember, don't get mad.
Get organized.